This is the Rebel Author Podcast, where we talk about books, business, and occasionally bad words. Hello, Rebels, and welcome to episode 282 of the Rebel Author Podcast. Today, I'm talking to AY Chao all about how to craft conflict and tension. First, to some comments on Rebecca's episode. Matt said, wow, this was so insightful. The tips you both discussed were fantastic. Can't wait for her to come back and talk about her book. And Mackenzie said, loved the Rebecca Faith Heyman episode. Can Rebecca be our new best friend? I loved Rebecca. I loved meeting her. She was so fun. And I met her in Stockholm. And if she does not have high competition, I will eat my fucking hat. So, in personal news and updates... Oh my God. All right, I like to be completely honest with you at all times. And this was the week where I looked at my life choices and wondered what the fuck I was thinking. So we had the delivery of 3,500 books on Monday. It took the entire... Well, so if they had delivered on time on Monday, they were supposed to deliver between 9 and 12 and they didn't. They were late. They were lovely. The chap helped unload and stuff. But what I thought would be one pallet was actually 6. And it was quite a considerable number more boxes than I anticipated, over 300 boxes. And this was because they only packed them in very small boxes, which I didn't know. I assumed that they would come like in, you know, I don't know, boxes of 20 or something. But they came in boxes of 12, which meant after about 100 boxes, I had lost the will to live. And I haven't brought any books in quite a few days because of it, because I can't bear the thought of unboxing another book. I have learned so much in the last week. It's crazy. So, for example, with these giant deliveries and offset print runs, it's not like print on demand where in order to get the books you have to pay up front. I still have not paid for these books. I think it's about £8,000 or £9,000. I can't quite remember, but I'll be paying that in the next week or so. But they invoice you afterwards, so that's a weird thing for me. I don't really understand that business model. Like, they're holding that liability, and I would much rather pay it, knowing, because I just want to pay it because I know I owe the money. But anyway, that's just me. So that's a strange one. Other things that I have learnt are that unboxing that many books takes more than an hour. And it actually took 2 of us 6 hours. It took us 6 fucking hours to unbox them all, because there are things that you have to do. So, for example, you have to check for damages, and there were damages. There were some where the spines were all crinkly, and others where it looked like the covers had been sort of marked or scuffed when they'd gone through the machines. So you have to count them in. You know, I'm doing sensible things like all of the books are in piles of 10. So that makes stock taking a lot easier because I just count the piles. But it's like I never would have thought about that until I was forced to have to do that. So, yeah, oh God, it's just a lot. And then, anywho, that took us all day Tuesday to do. And then I was like, let's keep some of these boxes because they're the perfect size for like 2 bundles. So if somebody orders 2 bundles, or they order like a trilogy and a novella and, you know, say an art pack or something, then rather than it struggling to fit in a smaller box, then, you know, we can use those boxes. So I'm reusing them because cardboard's expensive. But that means you have to, like, you know, store them. Anyway, my mum was a hero. And she like stripped all the tape, stripped all the labels. So we've got these boxes to use. So that's great. So I'm trying to be frugal where I can, because obviously we don't know, you know, what the costs. I mean, we do know what the costs are going to be. And we're pretty sure, not pretty sure, we are 100% sure that we're going to be in profit. But I am nervous because this is a new venture. So, you know, I've taken on rent, which actually is pretty cheap, to be perfectly honest. But it's still a liability. I have to pay that every single month. We have to pay a member of staff to do all the packing and shipping. I found somebody already and they are coming in on Monday for a trial. I've met them once, they're coming in on Monday. And the very first thing I said to them is that once they're trained, I will be putting headphones in so that I can write. And because I have to write. And at the moment, before I trust that person, I can't let that person in my unit on their own. So I have to be there. Or my mum has to be there, one or the other. And, my mum didn't sign up for this. So I'm trying to persuade her to work for me a little bit and help in that way so that I don't always have to be there and I can work or write here. But I'm having to relook at my schedule. There are so many things that I didn't think about, that person is going to come in a certain time period. And then it's things like booking collections with DPD, who's our shipper. I have to be there at 12 o'clock. So some of these things are restricting my freedom in some sense. And that is making me a little bit twitchy. But actually, eventually, when, this person's worked for me for a while, or there are some family members that might do it and then I might be able to get out quicker, I will then not have to be there so much. And this is part of the growing pains of growing and developing a team and learning to build that trust. But it's also other things like employers insurance, contents insurance. I didn't know I needed all of that. I didn't know I needed public liability. All of these things add up to the cost. I thought I had enough racking, and actually, whilst I have enough racking for the stock that we've got and the packaging that we've got, that packaging is enough for TikTok Shop. It's not really enough for the website as well. And I was sort of looking at how quickly TikTok Shop has increased, and it's almost, it's not, I would say it's at 2/3 of the output of Shopify, which is considerably faster than I anticipated. And yeah, so I think I've got to buy more racking. I've got to buy a second packing table. Look, this might not be interesting to you guys, but I'm fascinated by this process because it's not something that I have done before. It's a new way of being an author. I'm sure there are other people. Willow Winters is a big inspiration. She does this. So, it's been a lot. I went to the packaging expo yesterday and I was just so unbelievably overwhelmed. I only managed to be there for about 3.5 hours because I got completely overstimulated and had a headache, and I needed to put my loops in and wear some noise cancelling headphones because I was just completely saturated. I spoke to more people in 3.5 hours than I had done probably in the last 6 weeks. And it was a lot. And it was an entirely new industry. And do you know what? It was fucking brilliant getting to see a new industry and getting to learn, transit test. Never heard of that before. But there were companies that were use our packaging. We'll send you 100 of these. You do some transit tests. And I was like, hold on. What's a transit test? And they're like, well, you post your own product back to yourself to then see how the packaging stands up. And I was like, oh, right, okay. And actually that makes total sense, because if we are going to use new packaging for readers, we want to make sure that the books hold up. Anyway, so yeah, it was like a day of learning stuff. But I did find some new products that I have. I've brought some new products now, particularly in terms of wrapping. So one of my biggest issues is that we have been wrapping everything in bubble wrap, and it's extremely time intensive. We're wrapping it like a present, essentially, in order to make sure the books are protected. This is one of my big things. I want all the books to be protected when they go out, but it's not very time efficient. And when you're paying somebody to pack for you, you need them to be efficient and effective with packing. So anyway, there's this new product called, I can't remember this. I think it's called beehive wrap or something. But it's like this paper that when you pull it and make it tense, it looks like honeycomb. And So because of that, it kind of creates a lattice around the book, and it also like attaches to itself, so you don't need to tape it. So people can literally just fold the book in this paper and it's done. And then I found a company that had like a 2 machine, so you have a roll of this beehive stuff, but also I can have a roll of tissue paper. So, and they like feed out together, so it's still only one movement of wrapping the book, and then you literally just cut it with your fingers. But I've chosen black paper and then purple underneath for obvious reasons, but it's going to look gorgeous. And then I'm like, this is why I went to the expo. I went because I wanted new, cheaper options, because it's more economical than bubble wrap as well, and more economical than foam wrap. Anyway, you are probably all bored and have turned off by now, but I learned a shit ton of stuff, and it was incredible, and I'm really excited. We go live tomorrow. So it is Thursday, the 13th of February as I record this, and we turn on tomorrow. And I have to say, I have never felt more sick in my entire life. I have had probably 5 what the fuck have I done moments this week. One of them was when we'd done about half of the boxes and I was like, why am I doing this? This is ridiculous. But I think it will be fine, because ultimately the bottom line will grow. Even paying somebody, to do the packing, I don't have to sell many products to pay their wage. But I have definitely had multiple what the fuck moments, because this is all new, it's all scary, and I am having to learn about a whole bunch of stuff that I didn't know about. And whilst yes, I have high learner and I love learning, it's also really hard. This has been really hard. It's been a great test and I'm really excited by it. But I've also had some moments of doubt. I think once it's in and we have a routine and it's working, I will be really excited, especially as like one of the things I've been waiting to bring online are the art packs and the foiled bookmarks. And that's like the start of us doing merchandise. Oh my God. I also found another company at this packaging expo that, I can't talk about it, but this really cool thing that I've got this idea for that I want to do. And I found a company finally. They are really at the upper end of what I was willing to pay. But the fact that I've even found a company means there are other companies out there. So we can now do some investigating. But yeah, it was great. It was great to get out. I managed to write 3,000 words on the train. And oh my God, this is the crazy thing, right? I have actually written 12,000 words in the last 9 days. What the fuck? How the fuck have I managed to do that? I literally don't know how I've managed to do it, but I have. And no, this is not as many words as I would normally be writing, but it's more fucking words than I've written in the last 3 months. So I'm absolutely delighted. I'm really, really pleased. And the other thing that I've learned is that once I have started, once I'm in progress on a book, it is considerably easier for me to get words anywhere, anytime, any day, despite the interruptions. What I find difficult is getting to that start point. And so that has been a real eye-opener for me in terms of like production planning and planning my time. The most precious, uninterrupted time that I need is in that outlining phase. So that of everything that I have learnt, that has been the key, because I forgot how capable I was of getting words in amongst chaos. But if I don't have a solid outline, I can't do that. So yeah, that has been probably my biggest lesson that I've learned. Okay, so in terms of what is going on, tomorrow we turn on DPD. Tomorrow I take over. I mean, not me. I mean me. Yes, absolutely. It is me. Of course it's me. But I mean, like, the business now takes over all of the fulfillment. Oh my God, I'm so excited. And like, it's my favorite thing looking at the shelves, like in the unit. I don't think I've ever been more excited by seeing so many copies of my books. But I think that given the rise of TikTok Shop, we're probably going to have to do an order a bit faster than I thought. But anyway, I'm just waffling now. So tomorrow, DPD, Shopify, we turn on our fulfillment. I'm going to let it rack up tomorrow and Saturday, and then probably Sunday, Monday, we'll go in and just work out what's happening. Monday, the new member of staff comes in for their trial. And next week, I'm hoping to finish this novella that I'm writing. And then we are on the countdown to the Kickstarter launching. We have surpassed 1,000 followers. I can't fucking believe it. I think last time I checked, I was on like 1,035 followers or something. I would really like to hit 1,250. I don't know if we can, but I think we have 2 weeks. No, we have 2.5 weeks and a huge announcement today. So I can actually say it because you're not going to hear this live today. But one of the things that I repeatedly get asked by my readers is for the wedding. At the end of the Girl Games, there was a couple a princess and her partner, basically, and there was the allusion to a royal wedding. And I never wrote it, and I never wrote it in an epilogue. I never wrote it as a bonus. I didn't do it as a reader magnet. And I don't know why I didn't do it. I just didn't. And at the end of Kingdom of Immortal Lovers, which is my vampire series, I referenced the fact that the vampires are going to this wedding. And so I was like, how can I make something that will convince everybody to do the Kickstarter? And so I have been writing this bloody novella in secret. And it is the wedding novella. Now, it's not from the couple who's getting married's perspective. It is a brand new romance, and it's a romance with it's a crossover romance. So one character from the vampire series, one character from the Girl Games series. Oh my God, I'm so excited. I can't. It's so fun. Like, look, it's pretty much insta-love because it's a novella. So there's not a lot I can do about that. I didn't have time to write a full book, and I didn't want to. Like, this was never a romance that I wanted particularly, that I'd thought about writing. But then once I had the idea, I was like, oh my God, I have to fucking do it. Anywho, I get asked definitely at least twice a week, probably 3 or 4 times a week, whether I would do the wedding. And so I'm really, really hoping that once news gets out that I am doing this wedding, and you can only get it in the Kickstarter. I really hope that this convinces people to sign up to the Kickstarter. So we've been teasing this week with like stories and telling people about announcements. It goes out in my newsletter today, and then it goes out on social media later on today. And I am ridiculously excited. We will sell it. Eventually, I will do it as a launch later in the year. But yeah. So we haven't even, like, people haven't, and it's all going to be special edition. We've paid for the special edition cover artist to do it. We have, yeah. Oh, and because it's a novella, what we've done is we've put the Girl Games novella one side, and then we flipped it upside down and put this novella on the other side. So it's like an upside down book. So it's going to be so cool. So it's 2 in 1. So it will be a 4-box special edition. Anyway, I'm hoping this makes people go feral. And yeah, I'm super excited. I have waffled on for fuckloads today, but there's just so much going on. I want to keep you guys up to date. You can just skip forward. Maybe you've already skipped forward. Whatever. Anywho, I will leave a link to the Girl Games special edition in the show notes. The Rebel of the Week this week is Jenn Storey. Jenn says, when I married, I didn't take my spouse's last name. It never felt right and he never pressured me. Then it hit me. His last name is Storey and I'm a writer. I asked his permission and he said, that's the only pun of my last name I'm okay with. Thus, Jenn Storey appeared. Here is my 2020 glow-up story. I started a business and blew my own expectations out of the water. In April 2019, I left a really great job with the state of Indiana. Not the right fit, but best exit ever, except maybe Northwestern. Thanks for the creative writing tuition help. In May, I joined Don't Panic Management, Douglas Adams, anyone, an incredible virtual assistant agency where I still work. I explored business ideas, being child-free by choice. By 2023, I got bored, so I tested my skills and went into business for myself. A year later, I'm evolving my model, using every skill from every job to run my business my way. Meanwhile, I debuted as a YA queer sci-fi fantasy author and landed a small press publisher, Dreamsphere Books, Winnipeg, and moved across the US twice with 3 cats for the 8th time. Next year, I go back to school, aiming to become a librarian. I'm very sleepy, but realising how proud I am. This Rebel story feels like the safest place to share that with the writing community. Aww. Yes, love a glow-up story. And I love that you have made a success of it. So thank you so much for sharing your story with us. As usual, we are running very, very, very low on Rebel stories. So please do send them in. They can be any kind of story, something big, something small, or something in between. You can email your Rebel story to Becca over on rebelauthorpodcast@gmail.com. Please send them in. We are super low. Okay, one new patron, Chris. Thank you. And thank you to all my existing patrons. If you would like to support the show and get early access to all of the episodes as well as bonus content, you can from as little as $2 a month by visiting patreon.com/Sasha Black. Hello and welcome to the Rebel Author Podcast. Today I'm joined by Alice Chao. Alice is a Taiwanese-Canadian fantasy writer resident in the UK who enjoys exploring the intersections of identity and belonging in her writing. A recovering lawyer and Xiaolongbao enthusiast, Alice now lives in London with her family. Her debut, Shanghai Immortal, was a #1 Sunday Times bestseller, and its sequel, Paris Celestial, is out in early 2025. Hello and welcome.
Hi, thank you for having me. This is very exciting. Quick correction, it is out 3rd of July, 2025.
Okay, cool. So it's not out in early 2025. It is actually out in July 2025.
Exactly.
Okay, cool. I will make sure that we edit that in the notes as well. Okay. What is Xiaolongbao? Please, can you tell me?
They are small dumplings with a pork ginger filling that are traditional Shanghainese delicacies, and they're steamed. And they're usually a little mouthful, and we call them soup dumplings because they have, when they come out, they're filled with soup as well as meat filling. And so you can't actually just pop them in your mouth because it will explode with burning hot soup. So there's a way of eating them. You like put them in a spoon, you kind of poke a little hole out, the soup comes out into your spoon, you dip it in this sort of ginger and vinegar and soy sauce mix. And they're so, so good. Din Tai Fung is one of the places that is famous for them. And there's like one in London, a few actually in London, but they originate from Taiwan, those ones.
Do they do any vegetarian versions?
They do. Let me think. There's like mushroom. I think Din Tai Fung has like a few different ones. Because they're like dumplings, you can wrap whatever you want in them. So
the sauces
like
sound delicious.
Yeah, it's so, so good. And like, you can have vegetarian soup in them. The way that they do them is they get like it's like an aspic or gelatin. And so you can get like vegetarian gelatin, and then when they go into they're solid at room temperature, and then or you can freeze them, and then when they steam, they get all juicy. It's great.
Oh, they sound delicious. Amazing. Well, thank you for joining me. So for listeners, we actually met in Stockholm. That was right? I've done like 7 conferences this year, and I'm like, which one was it?
Stockholm. Yes. Beautiful. Yeah. This Stockholm Writers Festival in end of August. End of August.
That's right. Because I'd only just come back from New Zealand and hopped basically on a plane to come to Stockholm. So yeah, it was an amazing conference actually, and such a gorgeous city. But
oh my gosh, yeah.
Rather than talking about the conference, why don't we talk about you? So tell everyone a little bit about you and your journey and kind of how you got to where you are today.
So I think important to note is that earlier this year I was diagnosed with ADHD. Inattentive ADHD. And so when I look back on my journey, I'm like, that makes a lot more sense. So it's kind of, I call it the smell of the roses route. I started out, I I have this ADHD hyperfocus. I've always loved words. It's always been part of my life. I love reading, but I never really thought about writing. I studied Chinese and Japanese literature at university, and then I spent a year in Beijing. I went and through a kind of like a weird route through Hong Kong, I ended up studying law in London, where I became a lawyer. And I was a lawyer for a little while, and then I decided one day, as you do, I'm like, I'm going to teach myself to knit. So I learned how to knit, decided I absolutely was in love with knitting, knit like a crazy person, to the point where I was actually designing patterns. I was designing sock patterns for hand knitters. And then I was like, oh, I love yarn so much. I'm going to quit my job and import hand-dyed yarn from the US. So that's what I did. I did that
Wow.
for a while, got really into it, organized a few big conferences in London for knitters who came all over the world, from all over the world. It was really great. And then I got pregnant. The hormones affected my ability to actually hold a lot of the patterns in my head, which I was able to do before. I couldn't do that anymore. And that's when I sort of came back to, I had taken some writing classes, evening classes when I was a lawyer. At City University for, creative writing. And I thought, I had this idea back then. And I thought this is a nice opportunity to explore that. So I wrote the first novel and realized afterwards that I knew nothing about craft. Like I had a mentor and she was like, when you write cliches, maybe you want to make them a little fresh. Don't make them, the old tired cliche. And I was like, yeah, sure. And then after I got off the phone, I'd be like, Google, what is a cliche? And I was like, oh my God, I know nothing. So I spent like quite a few years actually just really deep diving into craft, doing all sorts of online classes, reading all the books. Then I wrote a second novel, which let me think, I got that into Pitch Wars, which is like an online content that doesn't exist anymore, but they pair you with a mentor. I queried that, it bombed, no response, which in retrospect, I look at that book and I'm like, yeah, it wasn't ready. It just didn't have, I don't know, a spark. It was kind of like, it was black and white when it should have been Technicolor. You know what I mean? Anyway, so I wrote a third book, and that was the one that I also got into author mentor. I really like the contest. I got it into author mentor match. Leah Ryerson was my mentor. She was amazing. And then I queried that one, and that one sold at auction. That one sold in a 5-way auction, I think. And that's Shanghai Immortal. That's where I am now.
Amazing.
So it was like, yeah.
What an incredible journey. And I think like one of the most common things I see with new writers is impatience and thinking that the first book has to be the one that gets sold to an agent or the first one that they decide to self-publish or whatever. And I think so often, so many of us have to do the work of writing and writing and writing and writing again and like finishing things. I actually binned my first novel twice, and when I say binned, I mean I literally put it in a drawer and I went back to chapter 1 and I started again. Like,
wow.
Yeah, so I did that 3 times and it was the third version that went to print. And like the thing is, there were so many, it was the same heart but a completely different set of clothes, if that makes sense. I don't know how else to describe it. But so you also considered self-publishing at the beginning, didn't you? And then you didn't end up going down that route. So will you talk a little bit about that, Jenny? Like what happened? Why did you switch? What other kind of routes were you looking at the time? Because you had some other crowdfunding stuff as well go on, didn't you, at the beginning?
Yeah. So basically, I think I had listened to Brandon Sanderson's, was it on Writing Excuses? I can't remember which. Brandon Sanderson was saying basically that he was like, I really wasn't prepared for, when you sell a book and you have the income, he was like, I wasn't prepared in those early stages, like those early days. I didn't understand that the money didn't always come. Like it was coming in kind of peaks and troughs. And, once you ran through your first payment, like, if it's in payments in 3s or 4s or 5s, like, what are you going to do? You have to wait. And so that really got me thinking. And I was like, oh, I need to diversify my paths. So I had always wanted to be hybrid. I still do want to be hybrid. But right now I'm like, I don't have the spoons to run my own business. Like the mental capacity is quite stretched at the moment. But, basically I like the idea of hybrid, being a hybrid author. And I really wanted to actually self-publish my first novel. It was a romance. The problem with it was that I wrote it and then I revised it and then I tried to revise it. I did the mistake that I think a lot of new writers do where they mistake redrafting for revising. You're just kind of like, oh, you're like, I'm rewriting this without actually pulling back and seeing the story as a whole. So there was a problem structurally with it, whereas like the story spine didn't hold up. So I was like, I'm going to revise it. So I rewrote that sucker, I don't know, 3-4 times. Totally new, like what you're saying, new clothes. Problem was the story spine was always twisted, was never right. And I kept making the same mistakes because I didn't understand how to revise. Anyway, so before I really understood that that's what I was doing, I was like, I'm going to self-publish this. And it was going to be a Kickstarter. So I had run a Kickstarter for it. It was fully funded. It did really well. And I was having a really hard time revising it. One, because I sort of, by this stage, I had learned how to revise. So I was like, okay, right, I see the problems. But I had worked on it for so long, I had literally beaten all the joy from it. And I just couldn't see a path forward because I was like, oh, there's problems, but I just can't see a path that creatively makes me excited and want to write it. I'm like, I can't write something that I'm not excited about because readers are going to know and they'll be like, why the hell am I reading this? This is dead. No spirit. So what I did instead was by that time I had sold my third book and that was being trad published. So I was like, look, I got in contact with all my pledges and I was like, this is the situation. I can either refund you your pledge or you can get the equivalent reward, but with Shanghai Immortal instead. And so I think I only had 2 refunds. Everybody else was like, yeah, fine.
And your publishers were okay with that?
Yeah, they were fine because it was like, it wasn't like they were like, if you look in the acknowledgements of my book, you can see all the names of all the pledges, like all of the people who my patrons. And a lot of them were family friends, but there were a lot of people I didn't know. So I acknowledged all of them and they were part of the journey, to be honest. And then they basically got copies of the book that I sent out. Yeah, it ended up costing me more, obviously, because I didn't have control. I wasn't in control of the printing, so the cost was higher. But I was glad that I was able to still fulfill the pledges that they'd made and send out the book. So that was really nice. But yes, lesson learned. Yeah, the joy in the manuscript still has to be there. Like I was staring at this thing and yeah, I'd like beaten it. And I think the next time I do, I'm going to do what you do, bin it and rewrite it because I think I would like to go back to that story. I think there's a lot of problems with it. Like it started out like what you were saying earlier. Like I'm Chinese. I grew up in a very diverse household and community. And the first draft of that novel was basically like, there was not a single diverse person in there, not a single one. It was like one woman who was like, absence any description, people would assume would be white, and everybody else was a man. And I was like, looking back, I'm like,
It's so interesting, isn't it? Because so for listeners, we were having this conversation off air, and they will know my journey. But the first things that I wrote were young adult, and what I found interesting is that I had put some description in about the characters, but the protagonist was not white. But because it was set in a fantasy world, I didn't necessarily define like what their kind of race or ethnicity was, but she came from the desert. So,
okay.
That indicates that her skin would not be white if that's where she kind of was born. And anyway, there was some description in there, but people assumed that she was white because I hadn't made an explicit point about it. So I kind of experienced that as well. But also, I wrote straight people. Why did I write straight people? Because we are conditioned in society, you know, and so much of what I had input was straight romance. And so that was what I output because that was what I, you know, knew and read. Okay, we could talk about kind of identity and belonging and stuff in the context of novels, but what I really want to dig into, because this was one of the sessions that you delivered in Stockholm, is about crafting conflict and tension, because I think without those two things there is no novel. So I wondered if you could just explain the difference between tension and conflict. Like, are they the same? Are they different? What are they? And how do they work together in your stories?
Okay, so I think you can have tension without conflict, but you can't have conflict without tension. So I'll go with tension first. Tension is like, basically, I say it's kind of like the idea of it's the no but. It's a friction. It's denying character or reader desires and expectations. So you're talking about suspense, uncertainty, anticipation. That adrenaline response when you're on the edge of your seat. I was like, on the seat of your pants. That's not the right way to say that. I was like, wait.
And I finished it in my head as well. And I was like, that's not right.
No, right. You're like, what?
Yeah.
Edge of your seat feeling. And it can be enjoyable or uncomfortable. You know, you're talking like, or both at the same time. And if I break them down, you've got the external. So we're going to call that macro. You're talking antagonistic forces. This is your classic conflict, you know, opposing to like the winner takes all. You have the struggle between two opposing forces. You can have misaligned interests. So it's not exactly opposing, but they're not quite dovetailing. You can have surprise, anxiety, mystery. You can have narrative that introduces cliffhangers or dramatic irony, where the reader knows things that the characters don't. That's all a kind of friction that makes readers suspenseful and anticipatory in terms of reading. Like, you want to know what happens next. Then you also have internal, which is microtension. And microtension is like one of my favorite things. It's so cool. But basically, you're talking all the internal stuff, any kind of emotional dissonance, like being happy and sad at the same time, grieving and laughing at the same time. That's a tension. You can have incongruous thoughts. You know, you think you hate this person, but kind of find them sexy. What? Like, that's a tension. Like, it's great. Romance is great at this. Reaction to external events. That's also, if it's a reaction that is unexpected for the reader, that's also like, you're just like, oh, what? Like, it makes you sit up taller. And then also contradiction, cognitive dissonance, where, you know, let me think. Remains of the Day is great at this. Remains of the Day, where you have the butler who's like, he thinks he's so, like, you know, unaffected by things, and yet the reader can see, like, you are saying you're fine, but the way that you're acting clearly shows that you are not aware of your own self. You know, that also creates a kind of tension. Whereas conflict is very much like, I think, in simple terms, it's like where you have a MacGuffin, or where only one side can win. Game of Thrones is fantastic. There's only one Iron Throne. So these are goals, right? And it can also be between characters. It can be character versus nature, society, fate, supernatural, technology. And in hero journey stories, the way that you can identify this is often there's a villain. You know, you have Luke Skywalker versus Darth Vader, Ripley versus the alien in Alien. And you can have a whole movie that doesn't have that kind of thing. So Parasite is a perfect example. If you've seen that movie, it does not, if you think about it, there is no clear villain. There's no central villain. There's no kind of, they often say it's conflictless. I mean, there is, you know, we'll see later. There is conflict, but mostly it's the tension. And it's driven by massive doses of suspense, uncertainty, and surprise. So the reader's or the audience's expectations are constantly upended. Who you think are the underdogs and who you think is kind of like the opposing force gets twisted. Like halfway through, you're like, there's that, I'm not going to spoiler it, but halfway through, who you think is the sort of bad guy, the less like who you don't want to cheer for is completely twisted. The person who's like the people who are like the who would classically be your protagonist, the underdog who's trying to, fight the good fight, that gets completely upended. And, that is all tension and playing and manipulating or audience expectations.
Okay, so I have two questions. All of this is super interesting. And so I'm in the stages of outlining. So you're giving me like a ton of reminders of stuff that like maybe that I internalize, but sometimes when we make it reconscious again, we can then really make our work intentional over that element. But my two questions are, where does angst sit on this kind of continuum for you? And the second question is, where do stakes come from? Do they come from the tension or the conflict or both?
Okay, so angst, I think, is tension because you're unless the angst is produced where like so the MacGuffin, there's only one side can win. Like if you're like, oh, the child wants a dog, the parent doesn't want it because they're, I don't know, scared of them or hate them or whatever. Like those are two opposing wants. Like you can't have both. If the angst is produced by the parent who is like, oh, I really want my child to have this, but I really hate dogs. I can't have a dog. Like that is a internal dissonance, right? Those are opposing desires. And you can't have one winner. So I think that is conflict there. But you can also have angst that comes from like just general like discomfort. Like I'm working, Clarice Starling and Hannibal Lecter have to work together. Maybe Clarice is really angsty because she's like, oh, I really want this job and I have to work with this guy. But he is, I don't know, he likes to eat livers and I hate liver. I don't know. And this is very uncomfortable for me. It's not like there's no real, like, how do you win that? There's no winning that. There is no one clear side. So that is tension. That's pure tension, I think. Yeah, does that answer it?
It does, yeah, yeah.
And what was the second question?
And the second question is, where do stakes come from? Is it from tension or conflict or both?
I think stakes is more conflict. It's really about like, the end. Usually how I like to frame it is stakes are the characters or the protagonist's ultimate, like it's a choice between two bad options. If they, I mean, like the biggest one is like, okay, if, what is that, the aliens guy when Will Smith, I mean, Independence Day, it's always movies, Independence Day, right? He's like, okay, either the aliens take over and everybody dies, or he saves Earth. Like if he doesn't save Earth, everyone dies. But like to make them personal, he's like, I want to save the Earth because I want to marry the woman I love. And obviously, if there's no Earth and everybody dies, I can't do that. So those are very personal stakes, but that is more than tension. That's definitely like, those are goals. And the whole movie and the story is supposed to thwart those goals. So the aliens are the antagonistic, the conflict force that don't want him to reach those goals.
Okay, cool. So I kind of feel like the conflict is like the rosebud and the tension are all the leaves on the outside, kind of like ratcheting it up, maybe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. Because conflict is, I mean, tension is so many, like you can do it with so much and you can layer it in so many ways.
Yeah. Okay, cool. All right. Can you kind of walk us through the process of building sustainable tension like across a novel rather than just, worrying about it on a scene by scene basis? Like, does it need to connect? Like, how do we draw it out across? Like, you've talked a little bit about suspense. Yeah. How does it kind of work? Even like maybe even on a series level as well?
Okay. So, I'm going to go visual. I used to do this. I don't do it anymore. But when I was first starting out, I really liked to color code my manuscript. So I would take highlighters. So exposition would be yellow. Um, Dialogue would be blue. Action verbs like he hit him or I ran would be red. Internal thought, I'd make it pink. Setting was green. And tension would be on the side in orange. And what you wanted, what I was aiming for was no huge chunks of one color, trying to weave it in like a tapestry. And also trying to make sure that I always had some form of tension on the page. So I think that sustainable really depends on your reader.
I
So
think it
again,
depends
going
on
back to
genre too. Like, because
yes,
as you're
yes.
talking, I'm like, oh, I wonder if like in romance there's more pink than there is like in other genres necessarily, right? Because there's lots of internal
Um,
processing emotion in romance.
I don't know. I think that, yeah, I think that will definitely vary. I think it's still good to try to have, um, uh, like, to weave things in, to not only have big blocks of
Of
thought or
course.
big blocks of movement or big blocks of, um, like, dialogue. Like, it is kind of, and of course, every book is different. Like, if it works, it works. You know, like there's no like hard and fast rule. I think if it works, it works. That's like if the reader, if it's clear and if it works, then no notes. But I do think like depending on the genre, depending on your story, depending on your readers, your target readers, that will inform you how much tension you can have and how heightened it can be. Like for me, I cannot bear unrelenting heightened tension. I find it really it makes me really uncomfortable. Like Parasite, I nearly ran out halfway through. Like I found it just physically unbearable. Like it's because the tension is so high. Like
Have you have you watched Maverick?
Yes.
Did you feel that like how did you feel in Maverick? Because the stakes just keep climbing and climbing and climbing. You think you're kind of over it, and then like something else happens and it like ratchets up again.
I think I was too annoyed with some of the like stereotypes to be like really fully into it. But I did like 24, like the
Yes.
Kiefer Sutherland. I couldn't watch that.
Oh my
Just
God, I
can't
love.
because
So I
that's
think
like
I'm the
continual.
opposite. I love that continued like tension in your body. Like I like if my heart rate
Can't do
doesn't
it.
get elevated, I'm not in. Like I'm not. It's like
Oh
I'm
wow.
just I'm gonna put it down.
Yeah. So like I said, like it depends, right? But I think sustainable, I think in terms of just for a reader, I think it does need to be like a roller coaster.
Yeah.
Like I think that readers do need a pause. Like if you're in a 30-minute TV series, okay, I think you can probably get away with that. But like for a whole novel, like 80 to 120,000 words, that's a lot of like if you're constantly having your heart rate at its highest point, I don't think that's sustainable. But again, you do have readers who probably would really love that. So, but I think like the whole roller coaster thing, having heightened sections and then sort of calmer sections for recovery and rest is really good throughout a novel. And again, I think with a series that I think that for each, see, I wouldn't. I think each book has to be complete in itself in that sense. Like I think that as a series, like I would be super annoyed. Actually, I have been super annoyed with series that I've loved where, you know, you have some five books are amazing and they're just perfect. Like they're like really in and up and down and whatever. And then like book six is just like, oh, it's really floppy and just like flaccid. And like I remember those books and I don't like them. So I think that for a series, like you I think they should all individually have that. And yeah, I don't think that a single book should be less tense because I think readers will remember that and be like, that one wasn't very exciting, you know?
How do we like let's take our protagonist. How do we
Yeah.
craft the best like interpersonal kind of tension and conflict and like for that character? Like how is it we make their pain acute?
Oh, okay. So I think layering is fantastic. Definitely having external and internal. Internal is great because you can put so many layers in there. You can have like, you know, what they themselves believe they think, what they themselves actually think or feel. Like there's the dissonance there. When you have a character who says, "Oh yeah, I don't like you. I hate it." Let's say romance. I don't like this girl. She's a pain in the ass. Whatever. Can't stand her. And whenever she talks to me, the love interest is like totally indifferent and kind of rude. And if she actually asks anything, he'll be like, "Hell no," or just hang up, right? And then their actions are like, oh, they go out of their way to protect that person. They go out of their way to be like, oh, she really wanted ramen. She's really hungry or she's feeling low. I'll go out of my way and buy her favorite foods and then just leave them and drop them at the door and then, I don't know, pretend I didn't do it. Like that kind of thing I think is really fun because it shows in layers. It really exposes kind of like that core of character self that maybe the character doesn't yet know. And I think that's really fun.
Is Shanghai Immortal romance?
It has a romance in it. It
Okay.
is, I think it's not capital R romance.
Yeah.
I mean, book one could be. Yeah. Like capital R romance, it's supposed to be happy ever after, happy for now at the end. And yeah, it does fit. I think it would fit. I think the series would fit in capital R romance. But the thing is, I like love stories that don't end happily, that are really like, people cry and are like, ah. So I'm like, I don't feel it's right for me to claim capital R romance because I'm like, oh, but then people will expect certain things of the novels I write. And, they're not, I really enjoy like the crying. I think it's like really fun. But yeah, so like you've got action, dissonance in action, dissonance in speech. Subtext is one of my favorite things where there's so much that is unspoken.
How do you manifest subtext on the page? So I think subtext in film is so easy to be able to point to and go, it's that scene because they do X, Y, and Z. For listeners who are perhaps newer to writing, how do they create subtext on the page?
So it's all about like, through everything else, whatever you're writing. Let's see. So one of the examples I gave in my class for subtext is Maggie Stiefvater's Scorpio races. So there's a scene in there. This is about a girl named Puck and a guy called Sean Connolly. No, Puck Connolly and Sean, I can't remember his name. And there are two people who live on this island. And every year on the 1st of November, they have something called Scorpio races, which is, I think they're like kelpies. Like, they basically are like water horses that are cannibalistic and really violent and stuff. And they come from the oceans. And every year they have a race. And the winner of the race wins loads of money. Sean is the stable manager for the richest guy. Sean is the stable manager for the richest guy on the island, and his favorite horse is in the stable, and he wants to buy the horse and leave. Whereas Puck her family's falling apart. Her parents are dead. They have no money. They're going to be evicted. She wants to win so that she can save her family. And there's like her eldest brother is leaving the island and she's very upset. And there's this scene where her brother finally tells her, "I'm leaving." And Puck is like really upset. But the whole thing is the way that Maggie Stiefvater creates the subtext is that she has the internalization. So we see what Puck is feeling and what she's thinking. But only in the sense that Puck is like, "I'm so proud that my voice isn't shaking." Because she's like, "Oh, fine. Then I'm going to go into this race and you'll stay until then." And she's just basically, the whole dialogue is her being, if you just look at the dialogue, you can see that she's being very adult, very calm. And there's a few internalizations or a few descriptions of her thinking, and just that she's very proud that her voice isn't shaking, or that her neck is really hot and red after she says certain things. And then the other thing that Maggie Stiefvater does is she reflects in the setting how we are to understand Puck feels. So she has another brother, the youngest brother, and at the very start, she describes the youngest brother is after hearing the eldest say he's leaving, the youngest brother is sitting there, and Puck notices that his fists are clenched so tight, his knuckles are white. And you kind of understand through that the tension in the room. And so like all of this is kind of like, they're like hints and cues and clues that Maggie Stiefvater puts into the text for you to understand what the subtext is, that she is super upset. She's really unhappy about this. And it builds and builds and builds where she doesn't overtly say anything. And she's like, yes, I put my dishes in the sink and I walked slowly to my room, lay on my bed and covered my head with a pillow. And then she says something like, oh, I can't remember, but it's something like, you fucking bastard. And then she bursts into tears. So like all of that just is like, through the scene, you kind of are like getting all these clues, and that's the subtext. All the stuff that isn't spoken, all the stuff that is unspoken, and yet you have all these like little clues, visual clues, visceral clues to how she's responding to things. And this is another part of the tension, that Maggie Stiefvater delays the gratification and forces the reader to go through this, understanding that this is a really heightened emotional time without getting the payoff, where you're like, oh, you get the payoff when the character reacts, right? And it isn't until the very, very end when she isolates herself and she's like, fucking bastard, and bursts into tears. And you're like, wow, that was effective. So that's like, I think, how you can create subtext by using all the other tools around the actual dialogue, to show like, oh, right, or like hints and clues about what you're trying to say.
Amazing. Yeah, it makes absolute sense. I don't know if you can hear my cat snoring, but my cat is snoring really quite loud, and it's quite hilarious. So if listeners can hear that on my end, you got a treat today, a snoring kitty cat. Okay, one last question before my ultimate podcast question. What are the most common mistakes you see writers making when they approach tension and conflict, and how can they resolve them?
So I think one of the things is making it too simplistic, making it just simply opposing forces, like a fight, a physical fight or an argument. If you layer in things, then you have the surface level conflict or tension or whatever it is. You can layer in subtext, which can be between the characters, or like cognitive dissonance, emotional dissonance within the character itself. And like the more you can layer, and then you can also layer within the atmosphere, like the setting. If you create a setting, again, I love Maggie Stiefvater. Square Man Races is such a good example of tension. I had to put it down because I was like, it's too tense. I had to keep putting the thing down, but she does such good things. There's one scene where he, what's his name? Obi. There's one scene where Sean is meeting his boss in this tea house. And the way that the description of the noises in the tea house, like how he walks up the stairs, it's not just, oh, the stairs creak. It's like super ominous, the way that she describes the stairs. And so that just builds the whole atmosphere and builds the tension and builds that ominous, I don't like this feeling, what's going to happen, that suspense and anticipation. And like, if you can use all of those tools, I think that really helps. Then it becomes more multi-layered and sensory as well, you know? And also, yeah. So yeah. And like with arguments, having just the argument is kind of like, okay, yeah, that's very standard. But, you know, like any kind of dialogue, if you use the exposition and the information with the dialogue as ammunition, it becomes so much more interesting. So, you know, there's three purposes with dialogue. You either are arguing, so you're trying to win something, or you are seducing. So trying to either win that, like convince them to do what you want. And the other one is manipulating, like manipulating them to do something else, whatever. I think if you look at it that way, it's kind of, it's more exciting and it's not as straightforward. And I think that also pays off with readers too, because you want you want it to be on multiple levels. Like, you want a story that, um, on the face of it, like if people don't want to get deep, readers can just be like, this is a really fun story. I really enjoy it. But then if they really want to get deep, they can kind of dig into a lot of those subtexts and themes and stuff and be like, oh, this is actually about consent, or this is about belonging, or, finding yourself. Those are all things that are never really laid out blatantly, like, oh, this is a story about identity, or this is a story about consent. Like, those are all things that are layered into the story that readers who want to read, like, want to kind of think about it more, or want to just spend time kind of delving into those other layers that they can. And that's also rewarding, I think that's quite fun.
I absolutely love that breakdown of dialogue, that it's like trying to win something, trying to manipulate, or trying to seduce. Like all three of those have innate conflict, like built in, or innate tension, I should say. But yeah, I absolutely love that. And it's probably why I like writing dialogue so much, because I know you said kind of like win something in the first one, but they all sort of have that element of somebody's vying for power and that in my mind is vying. It's a competition, and hashtag number one competition. No wonder I like it. Oh dear. Well, this is the Rebel Author Podcast. So tell everyone about a time you unleashed your inner rebel.
Oh, okay. So, like I said, I used to work as a lawyer. I worked as a lawyer at a time when I think it had only been in the last 5 years or so that women lawyers were officially allowed to wear trousers at court. Yeah, it was quite traditional. It was kind of like pinstripes, charcoal, navy. Those are the traditional colors. I remember being asked once, I wore an olive trouser suit, olive trousers, suit jacket. And I was asked, are you allowed to wear that color? And I was kind of like, what? I'm not good with that kind of conformity. I find it very restrictive and kind of like, it's like you're being strangled. I really don't like that kind of arbitrariness. But anyway, so I also love vampires. And at the time I'd gone to New York with a friend and had some, the fangs. At that time, you had to go somewhere. They would take a mold of your teeth. They would like create the little fangs to match the color of your teeth, and you could clip them on. So I got a pair of those when I was in New York. And because I really didn't, this is my little way of rebelling. I didn't like the whole, you have to wear this pinstripe suit. You have to blah, blah, blah. And it really annoyed me because sometimes, I was like, okay, this is like smart. Some of the partners that I remember seeing, like they literally looked like they crawled out of, I don't even know where, because they were all rumpled, nothing matched, but it was a suit. Anyway, so I would wear these fangs to work. I would wear them in the office, and people come, for meetings and stuff, and I'd just see if they could tell. And sometimes I get funny looks, but for the most part, they could figure out something wasn't right with me, but they couldn't pinpoint what. It made me giggle so much. It was great. I love that.
What was your number one strength, individualization by any chance?
No, it's strategic, but individualization is like, I think, one of my top 5.
Okay, that makes sense then. So individualization is a proper rebel strength, and it does not like that strangulation of like personal like independence, I suppose, for want of a better word, or that personal like expression, I think is probably the right word. So that is so funny. Oh my God, I absolutely love it. And I also did not get along with having to wear certain things in the corporate world either. Oh dear, I bloody love that rebellion. I would have been that colleague in the corner, like with tears leaking out of her eyeballs, because I wouldn't have been able to control myself. Because I would have been egging you on as well. Well, thank you so much for your time today. I really kind of feel like we could dig into this for so much longer. It's such an interesting topic, and you make it sound like, I don't know, you talk about it in a way that I kind of haven't heard before, and so you really made me think today. So I really appreciate that.
Oh, cool.
Would you like to tell everyone where they can find out more about you and your books, and anything else you want to add?
Okay, sure. I am on Instagram mostly. And my Instagram handle is at AY_CHAO. And I have a link tree as well. And the link tree is AY_CHAO. And that usually has like all of my links to any of my books and stuff. Like Shanghai Immortal is already out. Paris Celestial comes out 3rd of July in the UK. Yeah, and I'm on the other ones like Blue Sky and stuff. But I'm not really active on there. I just am like like I said, I don't have very many spoons right now, so I'm like, I can do Instagram. That's fine. Everything else is too much. So yeah,
Amazing.
so come and say hi and drop a line or whatever. I love to meet readers. So yeah.
Perfect. Thank you so much for your time today. And of course, a giant thank you to all of the show's listeners and all of the show's patrons. If you would like to get early access to all of the episodes, you can do so by visiting patreon.com/Sasha Black. I'm Sasha Black. You were listening to Alice Chao, and this was the Rebel Author Podcast. Next week, I'm joined by Ali Rose, also known as Charlie Albers, who is the voice, the stunning fucking voice of Octavia Beaumont, my lady vampire, in my House of Crimson Hearts series. She is incredible. Her voice is amazing. Her talent is obscene, frankly. So I'm really excited to share that interview with you next week. Don't forget to tune in and subscribe on your podcatcher. And when you have a moment, please leave a review.